Welcome to Ace My Exams Learning. Let us get started with today's learning.
The extension of the Cold War, case study Vietnam. Question. The military tactics and strategies used by the United States of America against the Vietcong during the Vietnam War, 1960s, 1970s, failed to stop Vietnam from becoming a communist state. Do you agree with the statement? Use relevant evidence to support your line of argument. Interpreting the question. The question asks you to assess whether the military tactics and strategies employed by the United States during the Vietnam War were ineffective in preventing Vietnam from becoming a communist state. It invites you to examine America's military efforts against the Vietcong and determine whether these strategies led to failure in achieving their goal of containing communism. The key points to consider are: 1. Military tactics and strategies. Analyze the specific tactics and strategies used by the United States, such as bombing campaigns, e.g., Operation Rolling Thunder, counterinsurgency methods, e.g., safe villages, chemical warfare, e.g., Operation Ranch Hand, and troop deployments. 2. Effectiveness. Evaluate how effective or ineffective these strategies were in defeating the Vietcong and preventing the spread of communism. Consider the factors that contributed to the success or failure of these tactics. 3. The Vietcong's response. Examine how the Vietcong, through guerrilla warfare and popular support, countered United States efforts and whether this played a significant role in the United States' failure. 4. Outcome. Conclude by linking America's military efforts to the outcome of the war, the unification of Vietnam under communist control in 1975. 5. Your argument. Based on the evidence, decide whether you agree or disagree with the statement. Take a clear stand and support it with relevant facts and analysis. In summary, the question requires you to critically evaluate United States military efforts in Vietnam and provide evidence-based reasoning on whether these efforts fail to achieve their objective of stopping communism. Introduction. The military tactics and strategies employed by the United States of America, or USA, during the Vietnam War were ultimately unsuccessful in stopping the spread of communism. Despite its military superiority, the USA's failure to adapt to the guerrilla warfare tactics of the Vietcong, combined with a series of ineffective strategies, led to widespread civilian deaths, anti-war sentiment, and eventually, the withdrawal of U.S. troops. This essay examines specific strategies employed by the USA and how they contributed to its failure to prevent Vietnam from becoming a communist state. Vietnam was divided into North and South before the war, with the North under Ho Chi Minh's communist government. In response, the South, backed by the USA, faced increasing threats from the Vietcong, a communist guerrilla force in the South. The USA entered the conflict to prevent the spread of communism, subscribing to the domino theory, which predicted that if one nation fell to communism, others in the region would follow. This initial intervention laid the groundwork for a prolonged and costly conflict. Early in the war, the USA sent weapons and military advisors to South Vietnam to support its government against the Vietcong. However, the Vietcong's access to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a network used to transport food, weapons, and supplies from the north to the south, countered this support. This strategic advantage gave the Vietcong a lifeline that the USA struggled to cut off, rendering early efforts ineffective. One of the early strategies adopted by the USA was the safe village policy, which aimed to isolate the Vietcong by relocating rural populations into fortified villages. This was intended to deprive the Vietcong of supplies and information. However, the policy backfired as the Vietcong had already established close ties with local communities. Their highly effective use of guerrilla tactics allowed them to infiltrate these villages and maintain their operations. The policy alienated the rural population, leading to increased support for the Vietcong. Guerrilla warfare, supported by the Viet Minh from the north, included booby traps, underground tunnels, hit-and-run attacks, and sabotage, all of which frustrated American forces. As a result, the Vietcong's support base increased, further undermining America's efforts to isolate the insurgents. Another significant failure was Operation Ranch Hand, a chemical warfare campaign aimed at destroying the dense jungles and agricultural lands that provided cover and resources to the Vietcong. While the operation sought to deprive the Vietcong of hiding places and food supplies, it led to the destruction of the environment and alienated the Vietnamese population. American atrocities, including the use of chemical defoliants like Agent Orange, and incidents such as the My Lai massacre in March 1968, turned public opinion against the war. The negative perception of the United States tactics strengthened the resolve of the Vietcong, who received military aid from the USSR and China. This foreign support provided modern weapons, which the Vietcong combined with guerrilla tactics to resist American forces effectively. The United States of America heavily relied on conventional military tactics, such as deploying large numbers of troops to overpower the Vietcong. However, the soldiers sent to Vietnam were young and inexperienced, unprepared for the unconventional nature of the conflict. In contrast, the Vietcong were battle-hardened and well-versed in guerrilla tactics. Search and destroy missions, including the infamous My Lai massacre, aimed to eliminate Vietcong strongholds, but caused significant collateral damage and civilian deaths. This only intensified anti-war protests in America, as public opinion turned against the morality and purpose of the war. As the number of American soldiers killed increased, opposition to the war grew. A key element of the United States strategy was the large-scale bombing campaign known as Operation Rolling Thunder, which targeted North Vietnamese infrastructure. Despite dropping millions of tons of bombs, the Vietcong and North Vietnamese forces remained resilient. The North continued to receive military support from the USSR and China, allowing them to rebuild and resist. The 1968 Tet Offensive, a massive and coordinated attack on American and South Vietnamese forces, revealed the vulnerability of American forces. Although the Americans eventually repelled the offensive, it shattered the illusion that the war was nearing a successful conclusion. The offensive demonstrated America's inability to weaken the resolve of the Vietcong, marking a turning point and leading to increased domestic opposition to the war. As public opposition to the war grew, President Nixon introduced the policy of Vietnamization, also known as WAM, winning the hearts and minds. This strategy aimed to gradually reduce American involvement by transferring military responsibilities to the South Vietnamese forces while withdrawing American troops. Vietnamization signaled the failure of America to stop Vietnam from becoming a communist state. Although the policy was intended to strengthen the South Vietnamese army, these forces could not ultimately combat the Vietcong effectively. The United States of America withdrew all troops by 1973, following the signing of the Paris Peace Accords on the 27th of January, 1973, which ended America's involvement in the Vietnam War. After the withdrawal of American forces, North Vietnam continued its offensive, and in 1975, North Vietnamese troops captured Saigon, effectively ending the war. The fall of Saigon marked the failure of United States military strategies and the unification of Vietnam under communist control. Despite the vast army resources and strategies deployed by the USA, the Vietcong's effective use of guerrilla warfare, support from the North, and the resilience of the Vietnamese people prevailed. Conclusion: the military tactics and strategies employed by the United States during the Vietnam War led to its failure to prevent Vietnam from becoming a communist state. From the ineffective safe village policy to the disastrous consequences of Operation Ranch Hand and the strategic bombing campaign, none of America's strategies succeeded in neutralizing the Vietcong's guerrilla tactics. Public opposition to the war, especially following events like the My Lai massacre and the Tet Offensive, further eroded support for the United States military involvement. The policy of Vietnamization and the eventual withdrawal of American troops confirmed the failure of America's intervention, and by 1975, North Vietnam had taken control, uniting the country under communist rule.
To access more learning and exam preparation materials, go to www.acemyexams.coza. This link is also in the video description below. Thank you for watching this video. Remember to subscribe and be the first to know when we upload new videos.